Hey, my name is Mohammed Hamdouni. I'm a researcher in anthropology, and this is my talk on arts and colonialism in Morocco.
Des arts indigènes by Lyoté and some cultural policies were created basically to shift the point and to discover basically also this part of the creativity of the indigenous people and to see how we can have a power of domination over it. I will explain why later, but the creation also of the Tetuan school was in this perspective of how we can convert the creative power of indigenous people and control the Moroccan artistic or artisanal creativity. So on an urban structure, the segregation, the architectural segregation between the Medinas and the Ville Nouvelle, which will happen in Fez, which will happen also in Marrakesh and Meknes and Tangiers and other places, was very important to create also a difference between the spaces of art and the spaces of artisanship. The spaces of arts needs to be modern, needs to speak French, needs to speak Spanish, but also the spaces of artisanship were a little bit subversive, a little bit anarchic, and a little bit um, problematic. The Moresque architecture, actually, in cities like Fez, but it's more in cities like Casablanca, in the Habous parts, is very interesting because it blends the idea of a reimagined modern, archaeo-modern, let's say. It's like a traditional modern style of architecture, uh, like reviving the model of Al-Andalus or the Moresque style. The Bab Boujloud in Fez, which is the Blue Gates known to tourists, was founded basically as an example of this vision, because the Bab Boujloud is a new gate that was found in like 1920 commissioned by the General Lyoté, and it was allowing a direct access to the Medina because traditional architecture will not basically allow direct access to the Medina for military and security purposes, but the Bab Boujloud, and also you would not see tiles on a blue tile like that in the Medinid style on a big gate like the Bab Boujloud. So, and it was also another simulation or a blend between l'Arc de Triomphe in Paris and the big gates of Alhambra in Andalusia. So, yeah, the Orientalist representations, which is basically also was there for scientific, let's say, colonial purposes, because it serves also as a visual carnet for early colonial anthropologists, but also a romanticizing of Fez and Morocco. The photography and postcard reinforced also this idea of the exotic Morocco, especially in colonial prostitution. And there is a beautiful book about that by Christelle Tarot called Sex, Race et Colonie, about photographies and about also um, or represents the body of women, especially as according to the standard of the Orientalist and also phantasmagorical perspective of Morocco, and especially in Fez. In Fez, as in Casablanca, for example, the Quartier Bousbir was known to be an implanted colonial hubs for colonial prostitutions that were intendedly put by the French administration next to spiritual significant sites. So in Casablanca, there is in the Bousbir quartier and in the Medina of Casablanca, you will find many Sufi saints around this colonial prostitution zone. And in Fez also, you will find it next to the royal palace, which is also a double humiliation and a double message, basically to enforce basically the dichotomy and the presence of the oppressors in spiritual and high significant value sites like Fez. Here, it is interesting to see the artistic. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The traditional crafts persisted until under colonialism or colonial redefinition. But let's say that from a historical perspective, le service des arts indigènes, or the indigenous art service that emerged from the colonial powers, was basically to defy this persistence. From a historical perspective, in Fez, there were two events that were major and that shifted also the vision of the colonial powers to shift toward artisan, like artistic art vocational schools, and to industrialize artisanal. So the two aims were, how can we implode those artisanal guilds that were resisting, that were basically composed of national resistance and also revolutionaries, artisans, who would prevent us from controlling traditional spaces like the Medina. The idea was in years before the establishment of the official protectorate, many events of assassinations happened in the Medina for French officials by artisans and artisanal guilds. The idea of resisting to those powers was there as a part of what they call the protection of the sacrality of the space. And the artisans, anthropologically, they were not, as we understand them in the modern sense. Guilds of artisans still recently were having, at the same time, scholars, artists, and artisans who can perform in many domains of life. So there was this, let's say, Gramscian organic awareness of the revolution and the decolonial perspective. And this is very important because in the historical resistance in Fez, the artisans understood quickly that the French have the intention to replace them with highly industrialized processes. And this idea was very important to trigger their resistance. So when they resisted, the French took a strategy of basically embargo. So they were basically just like cutting every supply to the Medina to artisans coming from like other cities or other countries. And they were encouraging the people, the artisans' children or the children of the Medina to go to what we call vocational schools. And vocational schools were basically those schools where we will blend the industrial know-how of modernity, of French modernity, and le service des arts indigènes, where we have French artists and French writers who will try to make the indigenous, quote unquote, people express their own naive indigeneity in colors and shapes. So at the same time, those vocational schools serve basically to cut the traditional transmission way of the guilds, where we have children will go to the Quranic schools and learn in the schools, and at the same time, in parallel, learn in the guild and form themselves. graduate to become master artisans in like after 5 years or 10 years, but we will have the the proletarianization of artisans from a young age, which they will just know how to do one thing. If they knew how to do a rug from A to Z, now they will do just like one motif in the rug in this industrial, basically, separation of work and processes. And the first industrial vocational school was in Fez, in Bab Makina, where children would learn basically Arabic, Quran, and French, and also industrial design, and perform in the workshops. This will lead to basically other like people or other representative from the vocational schools to pick up some young artists who were expressing indigeneity in their forms. And this is why we have, for example, the Mohammed al-Rabati from like early, early, like he is considered one of the first because he was there before his creation were there before colonial basically enter into Morocco, because he started from a young age, but his expression was more canalized and formalized through basically his French teacher, and the French teacher who tried to give them the means to express themselves, and they will attend him and other artists, young artists, the first expo in Paris, which is l'Expo des Arts Indigènes, where young artists also they will express their showcase their basically naive work to the Parisian society and to the French basically society in general. So we have this formation of guilds, formation of vocational schools. We have at the same time this reaction, this basically cooptation of first artistic expressions as naive, and also the need to civilize those expressions to make them something like what was in the galleries of Paris at that time. So many, here comes the creation also of the Casablanca Art Group, but the Casablanca School, as a result, the art group is a result of the Casablanca School, because the Casablanca School historically will represent basically the second wave of vocational schools, where French urbanists and French architects will need Moroccan assistants to be there to help them replicate and also enhance and also refine their industrial design as a plan of the grand modernization of Casablanca. So the first aim of the Casablanca School was to bring people who can paint or who can draw, to help in the creation of industrial sketch and industrial prototypes. This will, of course, will give a generation also of by also means of self-consciousness, and also the context, the context, the international context at the same time. We have the decolonization process movements that started in South Africa, and also in Algeria with the Festival d'Alger, who will like put echoes into the Casablanca Art Group. And those echoes will create many critical reflections on the colonial framing of arts, when we will have Belkahia, Lihi, and Shib'a, who will try to, who are considered one of the revivalists of traditional symbols and traditional mediums as a reaction to colonial framing and colonial folklorization. And in Fez, basically, and in general in literature, we will have Khatibi, for example, with his double critique of the colonial gaze and the colonial narratives. We will have Shukri in his vernacular resistance, and Shraibi also. But Fez at that time will come back to its own, let's say, traditionalism, and ensure the transmission of artisanal know-how at that time, despite the loss of many artisanal discipline at that time. It got reduced to nearly the half, which we have now 30 artisanal discipline. And Fez will still continue to be the center at that time of political resistance. But in terms of art, it's like Fez didn't reach, because it didn't not opportunity to engage with the colonizer in a very intimate way, like in Casablanca, let's say, because Casablanca is the space was created by these interactions. In Fez, it was a segregation till now that you will feel between the old Medina and the Ville Nouvelle. This idea is very important to consider, because the resistance of the Fez artisanal landscape was more into, let's go back to reproduce, despite the industrialization that was very aggressive, especially in the leather market. And the leather market now is suffering because of this industrialization, because now, yes, the tanneries and the photos are beautiful, because it's an old space of like dyeing the leather and working with the leather and using the leather. But every traditional know-how before colonization disappeared. And this will bring us to, and you can see really the impact of industrialization on leather, in that sense, where all chemical matters like glue, like other paintings, like detergent, bleach, were introduced to the leather making, to the leather industry. And by that, they will have ecological catastrophes. Not catastrophes in the sense of like an ecological disaster, but since we know that Fez was built on a river and around the river was sacred in terms of artisanal construction. So even spatially, the artisanal disciplines, or the core artisanal disciplines, would be organized from the less polluting crafts at the beginning of the river to the last, to the more polluting crafts at the end of the river. This is why, for those who have been in Fez, we have the leather at quasi the exit of the city, or at the end of the city, because leather is a polluting craft, and we cannot use. And this organization have been persistent for like a millennia, because people were using organic materials and organic also tools and organic materials to work on their objects. And especially even from a popular perspective, the Wed Fez, or the river of Fez, is named differently in different stage of the space. At the beginning, it is named Wed Fez in the top part of Medina. In the middle part of the Medina, it is named Wadul Jawahir, the river of jewelries, where people were believed from historical accounts that people will find jewelries there. It was a kind of pure water. And at the end, next to the tanneries, it is called Wed Zbil, which means the river of rubbish. And it is the same river taking different names because of the impact of many crafts on it. And now the leather part is really problematic. And since basically the authorities don't have this awareness of basically reintroducing, reframing the practice, well, it was decided now that they will take all the tanneries and they will take them to artisanal complex outside of the Medina, where they will just like continue to do the same thing with polluting ways, but away from the tourist gates. And here is interesting to see also that that we didn't free ourselves from the colonial gaze, because if we consider that the colonial gaze is the gaze of the imposing radical other who is like coming to the space, and by whatever power he's shaping it, then also the lack of awareness that we have to aggressive touristy folklorization is another form also of colonial somatized attitude, because here the power is shifted to basically the precarity of the local versus the power of buying and commodification of the foreigner. And since we cannot give means of like direct material means of freedom, we cannot basically allow this equal to equal perspective to the locals versus the tourists in its side. So I don't want to get deeper. I just like float on many points. And thank you so much for listening.